Recently, I've been imagining what it would be like to take a Disney villain and adapt them into a Dungeons & Dragons villain. When you're the Forever DM, these are the kinds of things you think about. So, the first one I wanted to talk about in this video is Jafar. So we're going to be taking Jafar and turning him from a Disney cartoon into a Dungeons & Dragons villain. The first thing a villain is going to need in Dungeons & Dragons is a stat block. And we know that Jafar is a sorcerer of some kind. So I went to the monster manual as well as Mordenkainen's Monsters of the Multiverse for inspiration on stat blocks of NPC magic casters to get an idea of how to build this stat block for Jafar. Ultimately, I actually turned to Google and found a generic NPC sorcerer stat block that someone else had created, and I took some of the elements from that and then put in a bunch of my own twists and modifications to specify it to Jafar. A link to the PDF of this stat block is in the description of the video. Feel free to use it in your campaign. You can modify it or you can use something completely different. It's up to you. This is just my version of what I think Jafar would look like. Now at a first glance at this stat block, you might notice, oh, it's only a challenge rating of 5. He only has 75 hit points. His armor class is pretty standard for a lot of NPC spellcasters. And that's kind of what I was going for. Jafar, on his own, is in my mind, a lower tier Dungeons & Dragons boss. Something you might encounter in a beginning adventure where the players advance from level 1 to about level 5 or 6. This is the kind of villain they would run into. Now the first major thing I want to highlight about the stat block is the languages Jafar speaks. So he speaks Common and he speaks Primordial. And the reason he speaks Primordial is because genies and Ifritis are elemental monsters in the monster manual, and Primordial is the language of the elementals. So I figured Jafar would be able to communicate with these kinds of creatures, considering his entire lore and background is centered on the genie. The next thing I want to highlight about the stat block are the types of spells that Jafar has at his disposal. A lot of these spells are just kind of, regular sorcerer spells that I figure any run-of-the-mill sorcerer would have, but a few are handpicked specifically because of some of the magical abilities that are showcased in the 1992 animated film. First is a first level spell, Disguise Self. So in the movie, we see Jafar disguise himself in order to go up to Aladdin and convince him to go to the Cave of Wonders and fetch the lamp. And he does this in disguise, so it follows that Jafar in D&D would be able to cast this spell. And it's in the sorcerer spell list. I checked. And it worked out really good, because otherwise I was going to have him be proficient in the disguise kit, but it wasn't super magical, and I really wanted to focus on making this guy a sorcerer. The next notable spell is a third level spell, Hypnotic Pattern. So in the movie, Jafar regularly hypnotizes the Sultan, and he attempts to hypnotize other people throughout the film as well. So that spell is perfect for Jafar. Finally, his fourth level spells are Polymorph and Wall of Fire, and we see these spells used in the final confrontation with Aladdin in the movie. So there's a point where Aladdin gets surrounded by a ring of fire that Jafar conjures, and I figured that's a pretty good way to flavor the wall of fire. Then we see Jafar transform into a giant snake. He polymorphs. And it's not a true polymorph because he reverts from that form when he wishes to become a genie. Of course, he has his metamagic as a sorcerer, and I decided to give him a quarterstaff, that snake staff that he has in the film. I just flavored as a quarterstaff, and so he has the option to make melee weapon attacks if you want to. And to make him a little more of a challenging monster, I also gave him the multi-attack feature, so he can attack twice with his quarterstaff when he makes a melee attack. Generally though, he's going to be primarily using his spells, and it's not usually going to come to using his quarterstaff, but that is there as an option. What makes a compelling villain in Dungeons & Dragons isn't just their stat block. It's also their goals and their tactics, how they achieve those goals, and how you as the DM choose to roleplay that villain. So along that vein, Jafar's main goal is to acquire as much power as possible by any means necessary. He will initially prefer subtlety and deception, and utilize a lot of minions in the underground to go about attaining his political prowess. And he will hypnotize others who will not willingly comply. He is patient and will be meticulous in working his way up to a position of political and social power. Of course, he is deceitful, and he's not above cheating his way into that position, and of course he will also use his magic. Another way he will seek power is to acquire riches, and he is especially interested in very powerful magical items. With his connections to the underworld, he will employ minions to go and hunt for treasure for him, and he will hold a few magical items to use against his enemies personally. In particular, I imagine he is currently actively in possession of an Ifriti bottle, which can be found in the Dungeon Master's Guide. Now, he will not use it unless he has dire need of it, because, of course, there is a chance that when he unstops the Ifriti bottle, the Ifriti will just attack him instead of serving him or granting him wishes. But if cheating his way into a position of political power and treasure hunting isn't enough for him, he will switch to utilizing his magical powers openly to take what power he wants. In a fight, Jafar will utilize his most powerful spells to eliminate his enemies quickly, and if his own magic doesn't work, then he will switch to using the magical items he has at his disposal, such as the Ifriti bottle. So role-playing Jafar kind of follows his goals and tactics in the way they were outlined just previously. Setting up a campaign, I imagine Jafar will already be in a position of political power, say, as a Sultan's Vizier. Now he will have risen to power by illegitimate means, and there is a chance that players can find ways to expose Jafar for the fraud that he is. It's worth noting that Jafar does have a plan to overthrow the Sultan to become ruler himself. And he is cruel and authoritarian. The people will suffer if Jafar comes into power. Jafar does have the ability to scry on the players, and if he discovers that they are attempting to out him, then he will send his minions to deal with them quietly. If that is thwarted, Jafar will seek to deal with the players personally, but he will still go with a subtle approach. He may disguise himself or lure them into a trap with the promise of vast riches. If the players manage to elude his deception, he will resort to open combat. But he will do it on his own terms. He will force the players to come to him, and he will not pull his punches. This will be an epic fight. As the DM, make use of dangerous terrain and especially magical traps and features that will keep the players on their toes. Utilize minions in the fight as well. When Jafar is about to be defeated, he will attempt one last effort to win by unstopping the Ifriti bottle he has in his possession. And at that point, you make the roll when you open an Ifriti bottle and see what happens. The Ifriti might attack Jafar, he might be just a servant to Jafar and become an ally for him in that combat, or he'll grant Jafar his 3 wishes. Now, if Jafar gets his 3 wishes, you can choose what wishes Jafar makes at that point, but no doubt he will wish to become more powerful. No matter what happens, when the Ifriti emerges from the bottle, that will change the dynamic of the fight completely and create near impossible odds for the players, which can turn out to be quite interesting.